Damn, James, walking around in Silent Hill. Is it because of your late wife? No, it's because you're spending too much money on subscriptions. Well, luckily for you, James, this video's sponsor, Rocket Money, can help with that. Rocket Money is a fantastic service that allows you to go through your bank account and various other types of payment services to find out what things you're still paying for that you don't want to be. Whether it's a free trial that you forgot to cancel, a service you no longer need, or something in between, Rocket Money will find it and allow you to cancel or cancel on your behalf. It is a great personal finance app that will overall help you cancel those subscriptions, lower your bills, and just manage your money better. And it lets you set budgets as well to keep yourself accountable. So go ahead and save more and spend less. Join the 5 million people already currently using Rocket Money by going to rocketmoney.com/Bricky or clicking the link in the description to get started for free. And if you want them, snag the new features with the premium. That's rocketmoney.com/Bricky to get started for free. Thank you so much for sponsoring this video.
Hey you, yeah, you. Do you want to play the most down bad character in a video game? Are you interested in the psychological trauma of the literal embodiment of a wet cat? Do you say would after seeing something vaguely feminine? Then come on down to Silent Hill, the greatest place for psychological torture you've ever seen. We have depressed husbands, traumatized ladies, horrible children, torture devices everywhere, and so much more. So come on down. What could you possibly be running from?
Oh, 9! Oh, God! God! Just rub one out, James. Rub one out, James. Just not! 2024 has been a bizarre year for preconceived notions, and nowhere has that been felt more apparent in the gaming industry than with the release of the Silent Hill 2 remake. Not only to massive critical, but also to massive commercial acclaim. I will admit I was a Bloober Team doubter. Of course, never wanting them to fail, because that's a terminally online psychotic behavior type thing. But everything I saw in the trailers was pushing me towards a lack of faith rather than increasing it. There was also my apathy towards remakes in general, which I've had serious cognitive dissonance about in the last few years. On one hand, I dislike that similarly to the film industry, a lot of the big budget projects are simply rebooting or remaking existing properties. On the other hand, remaking 20-year-old video games is far better than digging up some old film IP because the technology has advanced tenfold. A movie is a movie is a movie, and it's told as a movie with new tech, but video games are fundamentally different experiences than they were way back when. So while a deep part of my brain is a little annoyed that the Silent Hill 2 remake will definitely be nominated for Game of the Year, it's such a different experience that I'm learning to accept it. However, out of all the things I was worried about, the biggest one was how they would handle the subject matter and tone of the game. Let this be a really fair warning. If you don't know anything about Silent Hill 2, I'm going to be discussing all of it. And what I'm going to be discussing is rough. This game is trauma bingo and includes murder, animal cruelty, cancer, loss of a loved one, child abuse, depression, sexual abuse, the big bad R word that I can't say, self-harm, torture, and the big bad S word I can't say, and so much more. The story of James Sunderland is not a happy fun time. It is a miserable experience through and through. And I flat out did not have faith that a remake in 2024 with, the change in political landscape and online discussion and all that, I didn't think it would stay faithful to the original. I fully accepted punches to be pulled and there to be a more watered down experience. Once again, I was wrong. So 15 and a half hours later, I have completed the remake, and I find myself in the unfortunate position to discuss a game that is not only fantastic, but whose story has been talked about to death while skirting the boundaries of YouTube's automated flagging system. So in doing so, I think I might need to talk about this game in a more unorthodox method. This is the entire story of Silent Hill 2 right now. James Sunderland is a pretty typical man who is married to his wife, Mary Sunderland. Mary falls ill with a disease that isn't explicitly named but is heavily implied to be a form of cancer or something worse. She is sick for 3 years, in which during that time, James's mental health declines rapidly. After the 3rd year of her sickness, he snaps and suffocates her with a pillow, then puts her body in the backseat of his car and drives to Silent Hill in order to kill himself. Either through a psychotic breakdown, the effects of the town's paranatural aura, or most likely some combination of both, he believes he is there instead via a letter from his deceased wife urging him to come back. Mentally, he spins a tale where his wife died 3 years ago, so getting a letter so recently is cause for alarm and confusion, so you explore the town searching for Mary. Silent Hill is a normal town for most people, but has a paranormal effect surrounding it for reasons that we don't need to explain for the purposes of this game. What is important is that it attracts people with their own various issues to the town and then projects their inner turmoil onto it. One of the side characters, Eddie, is massively insecure as he was bullied for his looks and weight for most of his life. At one point, he snapped and shot his bully's dog, as well as shooting the bully in the knee to watch him suffer. It's assumed Eddie may be on the run from the police when he arrives at Silent Hill. Angela is the other character who is on the run looking for her mother. Angela is not a particularly fun character to discuss, as she was physically, mentally, and sexually abused by her whole family, with emphasis on that last one coming from her father and brother. She is extremely suicidal and deeply traumatized by what has been done to her, and is in Silent Hill after finally murdering the 2 men in her family, and is theorized to be looking to do the same to her mother, who was also an abuser. Laura is a child, the worst of the 3, who basically runs around the entire town being a little shit, which in itself is the point. As an orphan, she befriended Mary in the hospital and was told often about Silent Hill. She is seen running around the town completely carefree because she is the only character with no guilt on her conscience and nothing the town can truly pull from. All the monsters and horrifying shit in Silent Hill that James and the other characters see are simply not there for Laura, which allows her to run around completely carefree and act as the constant for the story. For the most part, these are the, quote, facts of the story of Silent Hill 2, and are slowly revealed to you as the game progresses. Of course, a lot of this is found out in the final act of the game, which helps you recontextualize all the things that happen in the beginning of it. Symbolism is really the word to describe this title, since almost everything you see and fight are all reflections of James' subconscious and guilty mind, and how they do it is just really incredible. Is she supposed to be like the witch that was religiously persecuted? Is that the visualization I'm seeing here? I'm sure in your time on the internet, you have most likely seen the Silent Hill nurse cosplay before. A disgusting bloody mess of a monster dressed all sexy like. A real confused boner type of enemy. But what people who haven't played Silent Hill may not know is that all the enemies are like that, in their own weird way, because the game really decides to dive deep into issues that are, pretty fucking difficult to talk about. Mainly, James's inability to reconcile the sexual frustration he is experiencing watching his beautiful wife become a sickly shell of what she was and verbally angry at him at the same time. Like, that is a ballsy topic to try to discuss, the sexual frustration of being tied to someone who is dying and unable to assist with that need. How do you even discuss that? How do you properly tell a story in that way without pissing someone off? James, as a man and husband, wants to be by and support his wife dying of cancer or other illness. But James is a man, and men like to lay pipe, sometimes even beat people with them too. James, I need you to hit your target. I can't control how you swing your pipe, okay? Or where you lay it. Honest to God, James, if you could lay more pipe, you'd probably be a happier man. Mary clearly cannot do that right now, even if she wanted to, because she is basically tied to a hospital bed for years. And from what we know of James prior to him going crazy, is that he isn't really a bad guy. He isn't going to go out and cheat on her to help satisfy that want. But that sexual frustration is prominent and extremely difficult to reconcile, even more so when combined with the pain of loss and even more so when she lashes out at him during her treatments. It's what I think makes James such a compelling character, because he clearly isn't evil. He's a deeply unstable man, troubled by things he feels but cannot truly voice. Because can you imagine being in his position, trying to support your wife but thinking, hey, sorry, you're not very attractive anymore and you can't put out, and I'm just really struggling with that right now. You can't say that to, you know, your wife dying of cancer. You can't fucking say that, but you can feel it. And that feeling is pretty damn real. It's something I imagine has been felt and dealt with poorly by thousands of people, and it's never something that can be talked about because it's not socially acceptable to say, but what about me, to the person in chemotherapy. I cannot express how ballsy it is for a game to cover a topic like this and do it in a way that feels genuine. Plus, to do it in a way that isn't just exposition dumping, and I was really worried that they wouldn't do it justice, but I was so wrong. One of the most prominent ways that they show off this frustration is with the enemy design. There aren't a lot of them overall, enemies that is, but each of them definitely has its purpose. The first one you encounter are the lying figures, which make up the bulk of the base enemies in the story. Getting a good look at them will show off themes of entrapment, as they look like they're wriggling in a body bag, but also walk around on giant platform stripper-like heels. It also wriggles around a lot, similar to how James would see Mary writhe in pain in her hospital bed. There is a version of the enemy later on as well that, while maybe not intentional, definitely sparks some interesting metaphors. When, in my limited, very limited experience, with the opposite, sex, whenever a particular, female lady, woman would reach a particular not rising action nor falling action, but the thing in between, there would often be a sort of like hip raise along with planting the feet. I never realized that when those fucking weird straitjacket stripper bitches down there do their explosion effect, they do the exact same thing. It was where we thought it went? Okay, I wasn't sure. Mannequins are the second enemy type, and it isn't particularly difficult to discuss what they're trying to go for. Two pairs of legs, one on top of each other, and they make bizarre moaning sounds when you hit them. They are much more straightforward. That being said, they are also the source of the largest jump scares in the game, by far. The third enemy is the hospital nurses that we all know and love. These are also rather self-explanatory. Nurses are often sexualized in the media, both with their garment and just the dynamic of them in history. You know, the sexy nurse, the sexy teacher, the sexy waitress, barista, that kind of stuff. The big difference is the large, swollen head, making these enemies blind. As a nurse, there is plenty of symbolism there, as a lot of what goes on in James's head is hospital-based. But what I find interesting is the bulging head. Some of the places I looked up, including the wiki, stated that the bulging head is to represent Mary's swollen head from her hospital bed. But it also states that the nurses were a last-minute addition to the game, so the symbolism can vary a decent amount. Personally, and maybe just because I'm a little fucked up, the head looks to me like a condom. The thin yellow-orange color and the fluid inside of it really just kind of provides that appearance, with the bottom of it constricting around the nurse's neck, much like how James killed Mary by suffocation. And maybe that's just, you know, a glimpse into my dark reality. A full stare into my twisted perspective that would make most simply go insane. They actually did add a brand new enemy to the remake, though. It's the mannequin legs, but they're crawling all over the walls like a weird spider. There isn't much to glean from the symbolism on these, just that they're kind of little bitches who suck and I hate them. Dude, I was thinking to myself, I was like, maybe the reason I'm getting Oh, jeez! Then there are the bosses, which, oh boy. Pyramid Head is ironically the one that I have the least to say about, despite him being so damn iconic. It's a manifestation of James's guilt, a strong, imposing figure with a massive torture device on its head chasing him down. It's his desire for punishment for what he has done. It's also why they off themselves when he finally admits to his mistakes and somewhat accepts them. Pyramid Head is great, there isn't much to be said about him, but he's used rather sparingly and in very effective ways. Nice trigger discipline, James. Bad trigger discipline, James. The other bosses are equally as creative, but in ways that I wonder if I'm even allowed to show them on YouTube. Flesh Lips is one of the bosses, which combines a bit of the lying figure along with other aspects into a boss that is supposed to represent Mary confined to her bed. It's an evil, evil thing. And you fight it after Laura calls you a fart face multiple times and like, what the fuck, kid? That ain't cool. Then there are the closers, which I have to assume I'm being demonetized at this point, and if that doesn't do it, then the goddamn abstract daddy probably will. I don't know who was the person who came up with this enemy design, but it might be in the top 10 for the most horrifying thing I have ever seen. Even describing what it represents, the two figures underneath a sheet and a bed frame, is just, whew, it risks not only demonetization, but popping one too many madman's knowledges. I'm gonna start seeing amygdalas. It's just, you know when you see something so screwed up, but it's so supercharged with emotion and symbolism to the point where you end up admiring it? The original Silent Hill 2 team made these creatures with all of these things in mind, and to be able to convey what they convey the way they do it is astonishing in all of its bloody, horrifying glory. It's hard to discuss, yet I respect it immensely. I don't really want to lose the plot here though, because everything that I've discussed so far is entirely related to Silent Hill as a game, and it hasn't really been changed with this remake. For transparency, I do think Silent Hill 2 is one of the best video game stories out there. It's engrossing, it's disgusting, it's depressing as all hell, and it challenges you to think about things in a painful way. But I do sometimes feel like we sacrifice gameplay a little bit too much for some of the best gameplay stories. Collectively, I think a lot of us got sick and tired of indie game walking simulators about depression. If it was an indie game boomer shooter about depression, I imagine we would have been, seeing it in a lot better of a light. But while there are games with amazing stories and games with fantastic gameplay, if we're weighing up the two of those, I do think gameplay should take priority, because that's what separates it from being any other type of media. It's what makes this product special. The original Silent Hill was one of those games with the classic tank controls. It's an extremely old title, and almost nobody ever spoke of it for its outstanding gameplay. One of the biggest things that has been improved upon in this remake, outside of the visuals of course, is that it has been moved to a third-person perspective and seems to be borrowing a lot from the Resident Evil remakes. In fact, a lot of games have been doing that lately. But the question is, does this gameplay fit the game? And more importantly, does it add enough to make it acceptable for a modern day audience? And how many mannequins can you fit behind doorways? Bricky, I love the t-shirt. You did a great job. Oh, thanks, Tito. Was it a Matara shirt? Ah! The thing to note about the gameplay is that moving it to third person, I do think is a pretty good idea overall. Tank controls of the old game, as well as the old Resident Evils, were very much there for necessity, but you can't deny they definitely had some fun with it. They made the most out of what they had. Third-person shooter vision is perfectly fine and still lets the game get away with a lot of very creepy segments. Plus, the remake versions of the 4 main locations are stellar. That should be the first thing to note. The visual quality of this whole game is just fantastic and dripping with atmosphere. You never know if you might lose some of that touch when you update it, but I can confirm I didn't feel that way anywhere. Every place felt drenched in whatever emotion they were trying to convey to you. The apartments felt unending, the hospital claustrophobic, and the prison can go fuck itself. The gameplay of this, if you've played the newer Resident Evil games, is about what you'd expect. You have a melee weapon that you can smack people with, a dedicated dodge button, and a variety of firearms to bring to bear. There are also your 2 healing items, but for the most part, that really is the extent of the combat. You can go about it guns blazing, or you can stealth your way through, but yeah, it's survival horror at its most basic form. And that's one of my few complaints about the remake. It's that the gameplay, despite being quite improved, is a bit too shallow for my tastes. Now, when I voice this, the first reaction tends to be, well, James isn't Leon, we don't want this to be Resident Evil, and to that I fully agree. But adding depth to the combat doesn't make James a badass, it just gives me more buttons to press. For the majority of the game, you're basically playing Callisto Protocol. Swing, swing, dodge, swing, 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 dodge, swing, dodge, swing, swing. And that is only if you're engaging with melee. If you are engaging in ranged, it's basically shooting stuff until it dies, and they don't really shoot back. You're expending ammo not as a way to engage with the enemies, but you're expending ammo to not engage with the combat in a sense. The shotgun is truly a man's best friend next to his bedside pillow, and its ability to completely invalidate nurses is a lovely sight to behold. Code Red, Bricky's aim. Code Green, shotgun shells. But because there are basically only 4 enemy types outside of bosses and mini-bosses, you will be doing the same kind of combat on repeat for a very long time. A little more depth would have gone a long way. Something like a heavy melee attack, or a shove, or another firearm, basically just 1 to 2 more button presses would have been an incredible way to mix things up a bit, or at least let the player have a tiny bit more interaction with what they were fighting. For now, it's just a tad bit shallow for my taste, and it starts to drag in the second half. Speaking of dragging, the game's length is another negative of mine. It took me about 15.5 hours to beat, and I think it could have shaved off an hour or 2, mainly around the hospital section and the labyrinth. The hospital itself is very long, and the otherworld section also is quite long, so shaving a bit off of that would have been very welcomed. The same thing for the weird cube face puzzle. I personally wouldn't have the combat complaint if the game was just a bit shorter, but in the second half, I do feel like I was just going through the motions trying to get to the next cutscene so I can see the awesome story moment, and not for the gameplay, which is a negative. Which is too bad, because playing as James really does feel good at times from a fluidity standpoint. He also is giving a Game of the Year performance, and I'd be shocked if he doesn't receive a nomination. I think Luke Roberts fucking crushed it. I'm just like, ooh, video game performances. 4 women, 1 man. I pick the man. He really sounds pained and desperate every time he does some kind of melee swing, and you can really hear it, especially when he's like stomping on the ground. Sometimes it feels good to play a character that feels and acts as unsuited for the situation that he is in. It's fun to play as someone pathetic. It's relatable. And speaking of relatable, something that James has a curious fascination with is sticking his hand in every single hole he can find, or jumping into it with no thoughts in his brain whatsoever. I knew that Silent Hill 2 was the game where the main character goes into holes, but I guess it just didn't dawn on me that the man who has the tendencies he does will be so okay with throwing himself down every cavernous ravine he can possibly find. It's funny because often survival horror games will have the bizarre puzzle that makes absolutely no sense. You know, you think back to Resident Evil 2 with the coin statues to unlock the police station, and it's clearly batshit. But Silent Hill does get away with it a little bit more because we're in the weird nightmare dimension that is Silent Hill, and we're playing a character who is clearly not mentally stable. Just thank God they took away the strand of hair item and used something far more, intelligent. It's almost farcical how often James is just grabbing random shit for the puzzles he has to do. But I do almost feel like it's intentional. Between the horrible tone and setting, a little bit of humor as I watch him shove his fist down a full toilet really kind of breaks it up in a way that it wouldn't work if the game wasn't so serious. It also helps that the sounds made during all of this is, oh, it's so disgusting. There is also a massive contender for just audio design. The sound effects of the entire, Actually, did they get audio design? One sec. They did. The sound effects of this game stir a primal feeling of unease, especially in the first half of the game. Then you get to the actual sounds of the enemies and the combat too, which contains a similar level of visceralness. Is that a word? It's visceral. Just listen to an enemy make their noises alone. It's gruesome and nasty. In fact, to call one out, there is an area in the gallows in the prison, and you can constantly hear like the footsteps or something moving out there, and there's never anything there. You cannot find an enemy, you are not attacked, but there is something out there, and just hearing that as you're doing what you're doing is so unnerving. Audio design in a horror game is almost as important as visuals, and being able to show that off in such a way, especially with the change in perspective, it's great. It does lose a bit of its luster in the second half, but I blame getting more used to it as opposed to it not being as effective. You can only get so scared by the same sounds after 10 hours of gameplay. To round this all out though, one of the major differences in a remaster and a remake is the new voice acting that tends to come with it. The original Silent Hill is notorious for its pretty terrible voice acting, which I am told was intentional. I don't know if I believe that because like it's a pretty easy cop-out. Oh, no, viewer, it was bad on purpose. Though I will concede that the terrible, awkward voice acting did add an air of creepiness to the game to give it more of like a dream-like feel. It was stilted and poor, but considering how weird the rest of the title was, I won't go as far as to say it was good, but it did fit. Still, bad voice work intentionally or not is still bad voice work, and with a massive overhaul in graphics and gameplay, it's only logical that a massive overhaul in voice acting is also warranted. Plus, there aren't a lot of characters in this game, so each person needs to be giving an incredible performance. No screw-ups allowed. What is important to note about this remake is that with the new change in visuals, gameplay, and perspective, the old voice acting just wouldn't have worked. People like its charm, that's fine, but I'm not people. I think it's bad, bordering on hilarious often, which makes it actually not grating on the ears, but rather funny. However, the old acting would not fit in this new game. But on the flip side, I fully believe this new acting would not have fit in the old game either. What I think people don't appreciate about video games enough is that the gameplay itself will give you a feeling of tone, so the acting needs to embrace how the player feels while playing. The two coincide in a way that's hard to quantify unless you've played or made a bunch of video games. That old VA work doesn't sync 2001 Silent Hill because for the time, the style, and the world, it does kind of work despite its issues. However, it should be no surprise that this new remake's acting is just phenomenal. What really sells this is just how reserved it is. You know how movies often have their Oscar moment where a character tries to give an emotionally charged monologue that sometimes does and sometimes doesn't pay off? With the exception of maybe a moment or two with Angela, there really isn't a lot of that here. They aren't trying to remake this game with some bombastic, over-the-top loudness to cater to a new generation. It is still so damn slow, methodical, and careful with how it handles all of this. James is really giving a performance of the year here, and how just slow and quiet he is, how depressed he always looks. He acts like a man who is at his wit's end because, well, he is one. And I feel like it's a great vision into male depression that isn't something we get too often, especially in video games, or at least not to this scale. He just looks so defeated all the time. But even with that, his responses feel genuinely like the things he would say in that scenario.
I didn't do it. I swear I didn't kill him.
It's all right. I'm not saying that you did. Look, my name is James. James Sunderland.
I don't even want to get started on Angela and Maria. I feel like there isn't a scene they aren't good in. I don't think there's a scene anyone isn't good in overall. Like, how far we've come. You know, video games have been eclipsing movies in terms of acting here and there, but we are really at a point where video game acting and camera work can be more powerful than most of the best movies. It's such a lovely timeline to live in, to see all of this come to fruition. The only character I didn't like is Laura, but I think that's just because I have an aversion to children in media. Children are naturally annoying, so if they do a good job at acting like a child, they are annoying. Laura isn't the worst, but even during the Fartface debacle, I found her to be grating. This is my personal sin to bear, however, and I do not hold it against the game. Top level performances across the board. They really genuinely outdid themselves with what they were going for this time around. It's a little humorous how, despite spending as long as we have discussing this game, I feel very little needs to be said by the end of it. Possibly because it's a remake and the story has already been told, possibly because the game isn't breaking any new ground. This also might be a strange comparison, but when Ghost of Tsushima came out, I called it a cheeseburger at a 5-star restaurant. This is because, despite how much I enjoyed the game, it was basically a Melee Far Cry variant, just polished to perfection. It is a generally bland and overdone concept, but just shined to a beautiful, beautiful, perfect sheen. This remake feels the same to me, but in the third-person horror game world as opposed to the Far Cry world. It might be why some people feel like the soul has been stripped out of it. I disagree with those people, but it does play and look like many other survival horror games on the market now. I think it keeps its identity. I think it's a fantastic game. I think it's a great remake, and I think it's absolutely worth playing. But I do get where that sentiment can come from. To me, Silent Hill 2 Remake is an amazing title that I don't see sticking with people's heads for too long unless they haven't played the original game. To me, what this game does best is show new people a modernized version of an absolutely fantastic story equipped with stellar performances and not breaking too much new ground, which is damn fine by me. It's a 4-brick game to me. Negatives that I can count on one hand only. I think it also gets the passenger game stamp too, aka a really great title to play with a spouse or partner who doesn't normally get video games. That's a thing that me and my viewers came up with, the passenger game. You know, it's a game, you're playing it on the couch, doing your usual thing, and then like, you know, boyfriend or girlfriend kind of comes up and is like, hey, what are you playing? Or they're sitting next to you scrolling through TikTok, and then something happens in the game and they get kind of interested and they start getting a little bit invested. That's a passenger game. I think this one totally is a great choice for that. I wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone who hasn't played the original game, and I still recommend it to those who have and want to re-experience it. I respect its dark tone and its themes. I respect that it didn't pull its punches, and the fact that this is a modernized version of a classic, I think just pulls it off really damn well. I have very few things to say outside of praise for this title. Thank you everyone so much for watching this video. Appreciate it very much. You will have one more video from me in November, and then from there, we got all kinds of new stuff happening in December. And you know how it goes. Thank you again so much for your time and for viewing and being a part, and you know, the usual kind of thing. It's the usual. And Yeah, no, I'll see you next time. Yeah. Peace.